That's why he gave her a look, but he instantly regretted it. What he saw there was an angry goddess. Pulcinella's scheme had brought her wrath to the forefront. It pains me as much as it does you to see innocent people die, Pulcinella continued, failing to read the room. If I could, I'd try to avoid that as much as possible. But what do you think? Why don't you let me go for now? If we agree not to interfere with each other, I'll gladly give you Japan, no, half the globe, even. Given the threat of those bombs, he thought he had ample material to negotiate with. But that was just wishful thinking. Lowlife. I didn't mind how you targeted me, no matter how low you stooped, but I will not let you do anything that gets my man involved. You will never return to the cycle of life again. I will crush your soul and grant you eternal suffering. Veilgrind was, at the core, a vengeful woman. She was strong, and that gave her an above-it-all attitude in most situations, but flip the switch, and she'd fly into a rage. Wait. I told you, I have no interest in, wait. Listen to me. My people are going to set off the bombs unless I order them to stop. I have them on standby right now above the capitals of all 5 nations. Please, let's all just take a deep breath and... Will you shut up already? I took care of that long ago. Eh? Pulcinella couldn't parse this. Neither could anyone else in the room. What she meant was a total mystery. It didn't exactly seem like a bluff. It had the ring of truth to it, but how could she have protected 5 different countries while remaining in this conference hall? That, of course, was because Veilgrind had parallel existence, a skill that made such a feat completely possible. She would never leave Oharu's side for any reason, which kept the conquering empire safe. She could also travel instantly to any point she had visited before, and she had been to Azeria, Arcia, Rossium, and the Chinese fiefdoms. That eliminated any potential problems. All she'd had to do was send out some parallel existences, bring them to each nation, find the Yoma hiding in them, and blow them away with their bombs, and the task was already done. No. That's impossible. That's completely impossible. Pulcinella frantically tried reaching out to his agents. The result was silence, and indeed, they had been silenced well before now. Faced with this reality, his face twisted in terror. Now, in a very literal way, he understood just how boundlessly dangerous the beautiful woman before him was. Please forgive me. Nah. It said there is nothing scarier than the smile of an angry woman, and everyone there now knew this to be the truth. No. Cardinal acceleration. Behind the fleeing Pulcinella, there was a flash like a supernova. Enveloped by searing rays of heat, Pulcinella's soul was crushed to nothing. And that wasn't the only damage. Veilgrind had intended to keep it as small-scale as possible, but it had had enough force to wipe out a good third of this continent. The survivors could only stare blankly. The goddess before them seemed so beautiful, and so fearsome. By the way, Veilgrind's cardinal acceleration wound up causing damage in areas quite removed from this world as well. The shock waves from it, riding in via-dimensional combo, went across time-space boundaries to even reach Cornu of the 3 mystic leaders, the Yoma boss that had possessed Pulcinella. Trying to open, then enlarge the underworld gate on this world had come back to haunt him, and thanks to that, Cornu lost his entire army and sustained injuries so grievous that they would take several decades to recover from. The fallout was nothing short of shocking, but that was none of Veilgrind's concern. Well, I suppose goddesses have always been like that. Clearly, much of the fault belongs to the humans that angered her. These were the first impressions offered by Oharu after being briefed on everything that had taken place. I'm sorry. I thought I was turning it down pretty low, but, I guess I pack a lot more of a punch than I thought. Trying to say that in a cutesy voice wasn't going to help matters. But Oharu didn't call her out on it, and if he wouldn't, no one else was about to. Veilgrind had done it, and there was nothing left but to forgive her. Fortunately, although devastating didn't even begin to describe the damage, Pulcinella was the only one who had died. However, The area between the Azerian naval base the Yoma had used as their headquarters and the hidden cove they'd used as a military port was completely obliterated. The shock waves shook the ocean, leading to large-scale natural disasters, but Vielgrind quelled them before anything serious occurred. The steam from the evaporated seawater created storms, but she used climate control to make them go away. The wrecked cove turned into a small mountain of pure magma, but that was already taken care of. Some forested land and the like was lost, but aiming some high healing at the land, a move that made no sense to observers, let Vielgrind create entirely new environments before the day was through. So while the geography of the world had been irrevocably changed, the actual impact was pretty low. That was the ultimate conclusion people reached, and that marked the end of the Yoma's invasion, all solved with the help of one moody goddess. A few years passed. Vielgrind never intervened in human history again. Oharu didn't want her to. Her power was transcendent, and in a world without serious magic like this, things would just turn into a farce whenever she showed up. Therefore, she left matters to him. He might make mistakes sometimes, but as he warned her, those experiences would help humanity in time. So the goddess stayed by Oharu's side, calmly watching over the workings of man. In time, the end came. Oharu's life had run out. Vielgrind was there, along with Oharu's family and close advisors, as well as anyone else who had been involved with the emperor and his consort. The sleeping Oharu awoke to find himself surrounded by them. I am happy. I have been blessed with the honor of being loved by a goddess, and I have enjoyed the peace that brought me. I worry for those I leave behind, but I refuse to allow you to fight for my sake. You must always strive for a peaceful resolution. There is nothing good about conflict. Those were Oharu's last words. Conflict was something he was willing to stomach if it were for his own sake. But if it was for the sake of his loved ones, it quickly became unavoidable. It would cost not just him, but his loved ones their honor. He could perhaps rile them into action to dispel their fears, but doing that on a national or religious level could never be tolerated. Saying you were fighting for the sake of someone besides yourself sounded nice, but all that did was shunt responsibility onto the other party. Oharu was trying to say that each one of them, individually, had to bear responsibility for what they did. After experiencing an era racked by vast sea changes, Oharu held a dream that he could pursue a world without conflict. He didn't know how to make it come true, but he constantly thought over potential solutions. He had a responsibility, and he was sticking to it. He never stopped trying to understand the other side's perspective, and he used that understanding to reach common ground through talking. With those two pieces of advice, Oharu breathed his last. His expression was a picture of serenity. His death was no doubt a painless one. You worked so hard. I'm very proud of you. Vielgrind reached out to caress the late Oharu's face. Then his body began to glow. The light compressed itself into a small, crystalline form, the shining soul fragment. Vielgrind held it tightly against her chest, then shed a tear filled with equal parts love and heartrending pain. Now that Oharu, the reincarnation of Ludora, had passed on, Vielgrind had no further reason to stay. I'm off. Good luck to you all. She thought about adding I doubt I'll see any of you again, but decided against it. The thought, she was sure, would come across. I only wish I could continue to chase after you, Lady Longhuang. Well, you can't. Maybe not. But I'd prefer to hold on to hope instead of giving up here. Yeah. I suppose I've visited this planet several times over the years, after all. There's no such thing as an absolute. Keep up the good work, okay? Yes. Xianhua looked energized. Several onlookers had the same dream. They were charmed, they couldn't not be charmed by the divinity of the living goddess before them, and they held hope in their hearts that someday, they would run into Vielgrind the way Xianhua had. May we meet again, someday. Masahiko Amari's parting words represented the thoughts of everybody on hand. Vielgrind flashed a soft smile. There was no telling what was on her mind, but the smile immediately captivated everyone who saw it. Yes, she said, enjoying the moment. Someday. And then she flew off. Several decades passed after Vielgrin's departure. Humanity was at peace once again. Some nations had nursed aspirations of domination, but the whole Yoma affair had nipped all that in the bud. The lesson would doubtlessly be retained for at least a few generations to come, and no major wars were likely to erupt before then. George Hayes returned to his role as president of Azyria, serving out his term and then retiring to support his son. Emile wound up establishing an entertainment agency, hoping to make this world struggling under war and famine just a little bit brighter. For Emile, whose genes had come from one of the world's genius-level swindlers, it was work he was born for, and he really did make the world brighter, bit by bit. And Masahiko Amari supported him the whole way. Amari left the army soon after the peace treaties were signed. He'd asked for permission to resign in order to take on responsibility for the whole war, and Oharu, who had still been alive back then, had granted it. He had been freed from his responsibilities in the conquering empire, except for a certain secret mission Oharu gave him. Soon, he was working with Emile, helping him out with financial support and using his bottomless personal connections to help the agency grow into one of the big names of the industry in just a few years. Rumors went around that the agency used all manner of underhanded tactics to achieve its success. Amari had several mafia outfits working under him, forcing him to stay out of the public eye for much of his life. But he and Emile remained close, with Emile calling on him for help whenever a problem occurred. In time, the agency Emile founded grew to the point where it was one of the largest, most well-known companies in Azyria and across the world. And there was actually a very fascinating rumor about the company. One of the biggest stars in Emile's stable was a beauty by the name of Longhua. She was active in show business for several years before retiring, only to stage a comeback after a few more years had passed. This was, of course, another person taking on Longhua's stage name, but nobody knew exactly who she was in real life, and this became a pretty famous story in the entertainment industry. However, one rumor had it that Longhua's real name was Xianhua, and, weirdly enough, that every other performer who performed as Longhua also had that same real name. It was like something out of a fairy tale. There was no way all of them could be the same person, but seeing her perform, one couldn't help but wonder, and so the fan theories continued. These rumors were little more than tabloid fodder, but it went without saying that every Longhua really was the same person. Thanks to having taken in Vielgrin's aura, Xianhua had gained de facto eternal youth. That made it hard for her to keep participating in human society without raising eyebrows, so she relied on Amari for help. And it wasn't just her, either. Those who had overcome the Yoma possession by themselves, like Li Jinlong and Delia, had absorbed their Yoma powers and reached the enlightened level. They were far from alone. Out of the rank-and-file soldiers and officers who'd found themselves involuntarily possessed, the great majority had been released from their Yoma prisons by Vielgrind. But some of them became enlightened as well, and all of them were being managed by Amari. Gensei Akari and Saburo Minamoto were their mentors, teaching them the evil-dispelling Oboro Shinmei Ryo sword style. The fighters of the future were being raised there, and in time, they would form an international anti-Yoma organization. And until the promised day came, their fight would never be over. Chapter 3, Days of Upheaval. My name is Caligulio. I used to command the Armored Division, which boasted the most powerful force in the Eastern Empire, and that whole time, I was little more than a fool. I went on about how what I did was for His Majesty's sake, but really, my eyes were focused strictly on my own fame. Now I see how little meaning there was to advancing my career like that. I mean, a man from low-level nobility rising to command an entire force before age 40 really is something to crow about. Receiving a barony from one's in-laws seems like so much garbage compared to being a division commander. It'd be foolish to use that as an excuse, but I don't think you could blame me for becoming arrogant. And I still regret it all, of course. Still, I should note that I started my career getting chased out by my in-laws. I was born into a knight captaincy, my family having selected me to marry a baron's daughter from the main family. I was happy, I suppose, until I was cheated on and forced to accept a separation. My wife, or my ex-wife, was irreplaceable to me at the time. I thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and I thought I was the happiest man in the empire. She said she felt the same way, so I thought she was the one who picked me, but I was wrong. I was complacent, really. But a year later, when my father-in-law died, I was unceremoniously tossed out. I still remember it now, or it shows up in my nightmares now and then, that is. But there's no way I could ever forget how she looked when she addressed me. It was a good dream for you, wasn't it? A dirt poor night, getting to play a make-believe noble. But that's in the past now. My father ordered me to marry you, but now I'm finally free. And it's your fault, you know. You couldn't even father any children. I was so desperate, I wanted to scream. I couldn't understand what she meant at the time, but the bottle she thrust before me told the whole story. She had been drugging me the entire time. Maybe I could have lodged a complaint and filed legal proceedings. But I was fighting a baron and his family. My ex already had a lover on the side, a wealthy merchant, and that made things even worse for me. He had already paid off all the baron's servants to talk trash about me. So the merchant got the noble title and my ex got a life of luxury. All that even though my father-in-law had lectured me about how a noble must remain proud, even if he lives austerely. I'm sure he never liked living that way. But that's all water under the bridge now. Back then, I never thought about bringing my complaints to the people from the main family that took care of me, like family, too. My own parents died in an accident when I was still a boy, so nobody stuck up for me during any of this. So, sure, I guess it was just a matter of time before the Baron kicked me out of that place. Looking back, I think I might have gotten a lot of motivation from the whole experience. The anger and hatred I felt after being betrayed by the girl I love kept propelling me forward. I wanted to move up in the world and get my revenge, I suppose you could say. I was still in my early 20s. Young. Ready to use that hate-driven energy to work myself to the bone. I towed the line with death more than a few times. I put up some serious results. I didn't hesitate to take on dirty work, and I was pretty good at undercover operations. I was friends with this other merchant, and I tried cutting him as much of a deal as my rank would allow me. I also took on some money laundering work, passing around the cash to the nobility to build connections for myself. So thanks to all that hustling, all that striving for the top, I was a field officer class soldier by my mid-20s. I was a Knight Academy graduate, so I got to kick things off as a warrant officer, going up in rank every year or two, in other words. Pretty fast, right? But it only worked because of the way power means everything in this empire. By this point, I began building my own faction in the military, so I could gain a tighter grasp on it. That's when I met Minutes. He was from nobility, but he loved to fight. Which was pretty unusual, yeah. Whenever he went back home, he always wanted to set right off for the front lines, despite how much more upper class he was than everyone else. That baffled me. But anyway, he was definitely a talent, so I made use of the guy. I wasn't looking to have him like or respect me, so I was never too shy about asking him for money or whatever. But he was weird that way. He actually liked all my orders, and he always carried them out. Of course, he was using me just as much the whole time, so I guess we were pretty much even. We happened to be a good match, considering the goals we had and all, but it's true that we had a trust going, too. As long as I kept hunting for promotions, I always needed to seek out new battlefields, and as battle-crazy as he was, I was sure Minutes would take any order I gave him, as long as he could keep using his connection to me to see some action. Besides, I didn't have any family anyway. It wouldn't hurt anyone if I died, which let me be as crazy as I wanted without repercussions, so Minutes and I had this oddly trusting relationship going. Then Kanzis came along. He was famous for being a thorn in the army's side for a while, but all that mattered to me was how useful he was. On that front, he passed with flying colors, and I suppose Kanzis saw me that way as well. He started taking a liking to me, too, probably because of how I'd say yes to pretty much any military op. He was known for his overwhelming strength, but his rep in the military was in the toilet. He'd defy orders all the time, sometimes going berserk during battle. He was transferred into my command because of how hard he was to handle, I guess, but to me he was a godsend. Minutes, kanzis. I used them as much as I possibly could. I'd come up with ops that any normal guy would hesitate to even touch, and I'd make 'em run them. But it kept paying off for us, and before much longer, we were so high up that nobody could bitch and moan about it anyway. So I reached the upper officer ranks in my early 30s. My command didn't give me much time on the front lines by that point. That's because I lost my sight in my left eye, thanks to a certain someone attempting to poison me when I was younger. But that didn't mean I was any less powerful. Our nation had already opened itself up to a new power, called science, and that made it easy for them to create an elaborate artificial eye for me. I usually kept it under an eye patch anyway, though. It had put the enemy off their guard, I thought. I had assumed that my strength would wither on me as I aged, but I felt more energetic by the moment. I looked about my age on the outside, but internally, I was just brimming with stamina. It was like I was constantly in the prime of my life, nothing scared me at all. Ranking duels were a particular interest for me, but I put my dominance over the military ahead of that. I could sense that a commander rank was within reach, and by my estimation, that'd give me more power than the Imperial Knight serving His Majesty. So I kept building up my faction. I used Old Man Ghidorah in my drive to steadily strengthen the armored division. I had the merchants I knew provide money to modernize it as well. All the preparations were falling into place. I was building a resume for myself, and so, just past my mid-30s, I was named one of the Empire's 3 generals of the Guardians. Life couldn't have been going better for me. And I guess that's why, in between my duties, I began to think a bit, like, what's that Baron family who kicked me out doing right now? After I had someone look into it, though, I was thrown into distress. None of it was my fault, but, why? Well, it was obvious. At the time, I had obtained enough power to crush them all several times over. My banishment from their house was a pretty famous story, so it turns out that the military under me had taken action without me telling them to. Not that they directly knocked on their door or whatever. They just gave a careful word or two to our business relations, like don't tell me you're still dealing with the people who did that to our commander and stuff. I'm sure the big-name merchants who were told that had no choice but to defer to my will. I was on the fast track to the upper echelon of the army, after all. Besides, unlike in the West, the imperial economy didn't really allow for free trade to start with. On paper, only the nobility or military were allowed to conduct merchant activity. Nobles had the right to name merchants to serve as their employees and conduct business in their name. These merchants could then earn a salary through the profits they earned in business. That, I'm sure, is why the man who took my wife wanted a noble title so badly. That way, he could keep up his merchant work for whatever high-end noble he was working with, setting up his sons or daughters with noble marriage partners all the while. That title would then earn him the legal right to conduct business on his own. It was a classic pattern, something you saw all the time. So, yeah, now that merchant was a baron and all, but I bet he hadn't been counting on me climbing this high up the career track. The guy whose face he'd laughed at while booting him out the door was now a general, shockingly enough. The military ran on a huge budget, leading to all sorts of business opportunities, and it was the high-ranking officers who decided which merchant got what kind of business. As one of 3 generals of the Guardians, I'm sure it's clear what sort of say I had. I didn't control the entire budget, but the influence I had put me on the level of a noble earl or higher. No way some baron could compete against that, of course, and so all his military business connections were shut down. Hearing that made me feel a little empty inside. I'd wanted to get revenge with my own 2 hands, but now it was already mine without my even having done anything. Still, I thought, that wasn't any reason to let up. I'd already been betrayed once. If I went all soft now, it just meant more people trying to take advantage of me. I'd made it up to the rank of general in no small part because I couldn't father any children. Advance high enough in the military, and you were automatically awarded a noble title upon retirement. The more you achieved, the loftier the title. Me, I didn't have any kids and I wasn't gonna have any, so no matter how fancy the title I got was, that lineage would end in just one generation, no real threat to any of the other nobles. The military hates it when nobles recruit their own private forces, and in turn, nobles hate it when military officers get rich. The military gets the power, the nobles get the money. That kind of separation was considered really important, and one side bleeding into the other was seen as taboo. That's why so many of the top military brass were single. It meant they could dive into battle without concerns about creating widows or orphans, yes, but really, this kind of competition with the nobility played a bigger part. But now I was starting to have an idea. The Baron who'd betrayed me was on the skids, sure, but his life hadn't been totally destroyed or anything, right? Really, it was like a divine revelation to me. I still had stuff left to do, didn't I? The only reason that family's still alive is because they're nobles. Low-end or not, it's a barony, so they can live decently off their imperial stipend alone. If I can just take that title from them, they'll be ruined, with nowhere to go, and they weren't the only people I needed to purge. There was her new husband's merchant father, for example, and the earl who hired him. If they weren't around, I never would have had to go through any of that. So there you have it. I had to eradicate the enemy, or they'd get me next. But destroying an earl required even more power than what I had already. And that's when I began to aim higher, and try to obtain the kind of force that could beat anybody on the planet. Right, so after that, I was pretty much in my own little world. You know, I could understand just how low down and dirty it was, what I was doing and all, but it's like I couldn't see it, kinda. Yeah. Honestly, you weren't much of a pretty sight back then. You would have been perfectly justified abandoning me then, really. Then you would have been a general, not me. That work was never my thing. Besides, I never hated you or anything. It was the same deal with Kanzis. Whether I'm a good guy or a bad guy, I want to deal with the people I like, essentially. PFFT. You always were weird like that. I'm aware, but I sure don't need you reminding me. The men shared a laugh, Caligulio, the skinny officer in his 40s, and Minutes, a man in a freshly tailored suit. They were in the Elf Club, an exclusive members-only joint located inside the labyrinth. It was the stage they'd chosen to reminisce and discuss their past follies, all while sampling a wide range of the club's drinks. Normally the venue was off-limits to all but a carefully selected member list. You had to be on the list to enter, and only after undergoing a set of body checks and paying the entrance fee. They'd never have been allowed to set foot in it usually, but after the Tempest/Empire Summit the other day, it had been open to higher-up Imperial officers. That move had been suggested by Rimuru, who'd said he wanted to put this war behind them and build a better relationship going forward, and the two of them knew that. That's why they hadn't hesitated to take him up on this offer. But, yeah, you know what happened after that. I took control of the whole army and got aspirations of taking over the world. Then this nation beat us, and here I am. Beat you makes it sound like a schoolyard brawl. To be more accurate, you couldn't even put up a fight. Heh. No doubt. But I'm glad I got to see it, you know. Seeing for myself that Emperor Ludora and the Marshal, or Lady Veilgrind, weren't the most unimaginably powerful people in the world after all. I can't see how the thought makes you happy, but if you're glad, I'm glad. So are you planning to make up with your brother? Minutes gave Caligulio a self-deprecating smile. I pretty much have to. He's the Marquis banding together the nobility. With Sir Masayuki set up as the new emperor, it's our job to support him with everything we got. Although Minutes was born into the family of a noble Marquis, he'd joined the army anyway, out of a desire to prove his talents. Those talents had brought him this far, in no small part because of the preferential treatment he received as a highborn noble. Still, there was no denying Minutes his real strength. Nobody thought ill of him at all, and anyone who did received a lesson on how stupid they were in short order. So it was Minutes' younger brother who eventually became Marquis, but he wasn't very fond of it. He resented Minutes, in fact, for palming the job, and all the stress it brought, off on him. Caligulio had learned about that just a bit ago, so he was relieved to hear his friend wanted to mend fences with the man. A peaceful agreement was never possible for me, he thought. Minutes, at least, had the good luck of owning a family fortune and the freedom to use it however he wanted. He had the strength to back up his extravagant habits, though, if he didn't, he and his brother would have been branded debaucherous failures. Caligulio doubted that the two really disliked each other that much, though. Minutes' brother said it wasn't fair, the lot he received in life, but so would anyone else put in that position, really. It took someone like Minutes to get away with abandoning his noble title like that. Yeah. I'll be counting on your support for that, Mr. Prime Minister. Minutes might have escaped his noble obligations, but as part of the new Masayaki-driven administration, he had been appointed Prime Minister, one of the most powerful posts in the whole empire. The conversation between Masayaki and Rimuru had gone something like this. Why, we were in that big meeting and all, and I didn't want to rock the boat, but the more I think about it, there's just totally no way I could be an emperor. I've never even studied politics before, and, well, okay, I did in high school and stuff, but that was just, like, skimming the textbook for the stuff I needed in the test. Ha ha ha. No flaking out on that now. No? Of course not. You see how I'm muddling through this well enough. You can grow into the role just fine. You're being way too optimistic, Rimuru. Seriously, quit joking around with me like this. Ha ha ha. You'll be fine, you'll be fine. Everyone will help you out, too. You've got the biggest not my problem look on your face right now. I can tell. That, and I bet you're glad you have another friendly monarch you can schmooze with. No. Besides, like I said, you got a lot of people you can lean on, don't you? Like Minutes over there. I think he'd be pretty reliable. Minutes, sitting nearby, made eye contact with Rimuru, a serious mistake. He was pretty sure Rimuru was acting entirely on a whim, but either way, he had stood out too much in that conference for his own good. Being branded a capable man by Rimuru, he was promptly assigned to be an advisor to Masayaki, and that, once the dust settled, had evolved to the position of Prime Minister. Great. All Minutes could do about it now was laugh. He had Masayaki personally pleading with him for assistance, and it wasn't the kind of thing he could just turn down. Besides, when push came to shove, Minutes really liked Masayaki. It was better than getting browbeaten under Veilgrin's gaze all day. This, of course, led to one little problem: the post of Prime Minister was already occupied. Minutes figured he could make this man his assistant, however. The Emperor had the exclusive right to name his cabinet, so if the current Prime Minister wanted to complain to Minutes about it, he was barking up the wrong tree. He might have anyway, of course, but Minutes didn't care. He had come to know far scarier people in his life, and if the old minister gave him any guff, he'd just point him in their direction. Yes. I suppose this will work out in time. He had received more than enough of an education, as the heir to a Marquis family. He may not have realized it, but his performance was hardly unsatisfactory. It might have been a slog at times, but as Minutes saw it, he was capable enough out on the field. So he decided to bounce Caligulio's jab back at him. Don't make me laugh, Mr. Secretary of the Military. And I'll remind you that you're the only surviving division commander left, so you got a lot of work to do. Under Emperor Masayaki, the empire's military would undergo a massive round of reform. If Minutes took the cabinet position of Prime Minister, the current one would become Deputy Prime Minister. Secretary of the Military was on the same level as that. Masayaki didn't know much about government, but he did remember the importance of having a civilian politician oversee the country's military affairs. He mentioned that to his new assistants, and that was immediately reflected in the new system. In fact, though, all he said was, "Don't we need a minister controlling the army?" He didn't order it, and he hadn't postulated any kind of grand theory about a civilian-appointed minister holding supreme authority over the military. As a result, the Secretary of the Military was still selected from among the army's commanders, the somewhat skewed take on the idea, and now Caligulio was now both Secretary and Commander of the army. That was the concern behind Minutes' observation, but Caligulio laughed it off. No need to worry about that. We won't have a war for a while to come, and besides, as long as I'm running the army, I won't rattle my saber at any foreign country. Those were his honest, resignation-tinged feelings. Given the geography of the empire, there were no longer any neighboring states they could war with. The Jura Tempest Federation and the demon Lord Millem's domain were off limits, of course. Fighting the armed nation of Dworgen at this point was unthinkable. The dwarves were backing them at the moment, and they needed to build and maintain a peaceable friendship with them. An airship invasion of the western nations was plausible enough, but it was doubtful the demon Lord Raimoru would ever allow it. There really was no adversary left for them to point their spears at. The only ones were already within their borders, the powerful nobles that controlled the regional militaries, who might not know their place and could potentially be plotting rebellions as they spoke. We've already sent word across the empire. The nobles should be replying soon, but have you heard from Krishna? He hasn't made any notable moves yet. Your brother's factions have all sworn their loyalty to the new emperor, and I think that's keeping the other factions in check for now. Well, even if the nobles did reply, it'd be the same thing. I don't think it'll be enough to silence the sons of the emperor before Ladora, or the families with blood relations to him. I'm sure. We just sent out word that Emperor Ladora has passed away, so I'm sure some people will mistakenly assume their turn's approaching. That would only come with Lady Veilgrin's consent, of course, but they'll likely allege that the imperial household law no longer has any teeth and should be ignored. The fools don't even realize how angry that'll make Lady Veilgrind. Caligulio thought Minutes was right. The idea of rebellious nobles refusing to fall in line with this new emperor didn't scare him at all, frankly. His and Caligulio's victory was all but assured. The real problem was the hit the nation would take power-wise. The faker who'd taken the place of Emperor Ladora, not that Caligulio thought he was that, given how he'd been serving him his whole life, had been in cahoots with an unknown invader called the Aggressors and attempted to throw the world into chaos. They had fought one of their leaders, a man who called himself Cornu, so they knew full well what the threat was. Veilgrind had come along to save the day, but if not for her, the whole empire would have fallen. The being that had once been Emperor Ladora had wanted powers along the lines of a god's. After all, they couldn't dismiss the possibility that he'd seek to use the empire's people as pawns in this endeavor. Of course, nobody but a few people in the empire knew what the emperor's face looked like, so if someone claimed to be Emperor Ladora, they could just reject him post-haste. The enemy wasn't likely to try something sneaky like that, after all. The Ladora that Caligulio knew was never one to open diplomatic talks with his enemies. Now is certainly no time for the nation to be fighting amongst itself. No, it is not. I'll put out some feelers along those lines. If you could, thanks. I want to gather up the remaining Imperial Knights and reorganize the Imperial Guardian Force at once. This would be Caligulio's first big job as Secretary of the Military, and it was more difficult than even he could have imagined. He had to begin, for one, by figuring out just how many of them had survived. Caligulio didn't even know exactly what missions the Imperial Knights were assigned to. Their locations were unknown, so before anything, he had to get in contact with them all. Some would want to leave the force, no doubt. Krishna was one of them. He was practically worshipping the demon Lord Raimoru as a god, and he had already declared his intentions to quit his post and go live in Tempest. Caligulio had asked him to remain in service until things calmed down. He was too good of a man to lose, but he seemed ready to defy that order the moment he had a chance. It was a Dalman who ultimately stepped in. It's important, he advised Krishna, to clean up your own messes. If you leave while the empire is still in a state of chaos, I'm sure it would sadden Sir Raimoru as well. Yes, Krishna shouted back. That was an extremely convincing argument, Sir Adalman. The only thought on my mind was that I have been saved, but I need to bring Sir Raimuru's mercy to the ears of all the Empire's innocent citizens. That wasn't exactly the reaction Caligulio had expected, but Krishna was back at his post and hard at work, so he left it at that. No point dwelling on the details. But Krishna was far from the only officer looking for a change of career. A hefty percentage of the Empire's soldiers were starting to voice a desire to remain in Tempest. Caligulio understood their feelings, and he didn't want to force anyone to come back, but any further defections could affect the Empire's future ability to fight, so clearly they needed to ponder this issue a little. A large number of people had died in this war. They'd had it coming, more or less, and it wasn't a problem worth rehashing, but that didn't mean they could simply ignore this problem. The only single digits still alive, for one, were Bernie and Jiwu, just 2 in all. They would be directly answerable to Masayuki from here on, serving as his bodyguards. Veilgrind would have been more than enough on that front, perhaps, but they'd doubtlessly be helpful as advisors or go-to contacts for smaller missions, so Masayuki's request had been approved. Caligulio saw fit to take advantage of all this to reorganize how the Imperial Guardians were set up. It would depend on how many surviving Guardians there were, but he didn't see a need to stick to the set number of 100. He intended to do away with the ranking dual system entirely. To him, numbers shouldn't be allowed to be so important among the soldiers. If they were strong enough and absolutely loyal to the Emperor, he didn't mind opening the doors a little wider for them. His plan called for them to be deployed in groups of 3 across the Empire's cities, firming up the Imperial defense. 3 in one place might not be enough to defeat a high-level aggressor, but they could buy a lot of time anyway. Ideally they would remain highly mobile, covering each other and providing backup. The Empire had more than 100 cities, though, so they needed a lot more personnel. The regional forces were still intact, however, which was why the Guardians could work with them to cover matters for the time being. Either way, the Guardians would continue as a going concern, built mainly around enlightened class warriors and kept prepared for future combat. "It's an uphill battle for both of us, isn't it?" muttered Minutes as he finished his drink. "Yeah," replied Caligulio. "But it feels oddly worth it, too." This was a passing observation, but he meant it. Thinking he was working to better the Empire, as opposed to just trying to earn a higher rank, made the days a lot more fulfilling. Plus, now that I've heard Lord Raimuru's plans, we need to restore order and stabilize the government immediately. If we're late on this, we'll be left behind by the rest of the world. With Raimuru and Masayuki's approval, rail-laying work had already begun. In likely just a few more years, the Empire would enjoy a future where they were fully connected to the rail network. Even the little bit that had been discussed at the conference made Caligulio quiver, but that was far from all. "And, what about our plan to rule the world's skies? I mean, that demon lord is ridiculous. He said it while we were all drinking, but I'm informed that he physically cannot get inebriated. He meant every word of it." Yes, Zamdo was quite excited as well. He even offered his personal assistance for the project. He's really more an engineer than a soldier, though, so I'm sure that's where his interests lie. "So we'll have these trains connecting every nation on the surface, and then we'll begin mass-producing our airships and build a stable market for them. It's a scary thing for someone like him to come up with, but I think we can make it happen. After all, the only reparations he sought after the war's end were the rights to our airspace. He didn't ask for anything else. In fact, he's helping us rebuild. How could we ever turn him down?" Indeed. His Majesty Masayuki gave the go-ahead as well, so that's not a problem, either. It's what happens in the future that matters the most. Caligulio thought to himself as he spoke. Something about Tempest just didn't add up to him. The words of the demon Lord Raimuru, words that sounded like he was making things up as he went along, would be placed into concrete, executable plans by the next day, or even later that evening. He had apparently considered a plan to mass-produce airships ever since he'd known the Empire had them, but he was ready to provide an R&D base for the project immediately, which was unheard of. An entire floor of the dungeon was now serving as a hangar for airship repairs and upgrades. Zamdo was having the time of his life working there. He'd been given free rein to order whatever materials he wanted without worrying about a budget, which put him in the habit of saying things like "so heaven exists right here after all," on a regular basis. He was already amped up after surviving what he had, and this only added to his intensity. It made Caligulio jealous, seeing all of Zamdo's desires fulfilled like that, but he had to cheer Zamdo on. He would need to work hard if Tempest and the Empire wanted to retain friendly ties. But enough about him. It was time to discuss their future. The Demon Lord Raimuru's proposal offered broad support for upgrading infrastructure around the Empire. Having just been badly defeated, there was no way they could say no to that. The Empire could certainly provide its own labor, so they didn't have to rely on Tempest for everything. Caligulio's thoughts were very different from the Western nations on that front. As long as he wasn't clouded by his own desire, he was capable of intelligent, impartial decisions. Along those lines, he concluded that what the Empire needed the most at the moment was the restoration of domestic order. The Empire wasn't in a state of disarray at all, but once the details behind their defeat became known, it would undoubtedly shock their citizens. Rimuru would be seen as the hateful enemy of anyone who'd lost their family, of course. Krishna and other officers were working to stave that off, but Caligulio needed to tackle the issue as well. Also, as Minutes warily pointed out, the more powerful nobles were making ominous-looking moves. They would need to welcome Tempestian forces into their empire for the sake of future development, but they couldn't afford to let that lead to disputes, no matter what. There was a mountain of problems to address. Yeah. But Caligulio. What? Don't you think the Demon Lord Rimuru has it much worse than we do? A moment of thought, and Caligulio felt Minutes was right. They had been told about all these plans for future development, and they were just beginning to put in the hours to make them happen. But that went without saying. Things like restoring order and developing your home nation aren't things you do because you're ordered to. You beaver away at it daily because you want to make your home a better place. They were facing an unavoidable battle with the aggressors sometime soon, but, as they just realized, they weren't all that nervous about it. They had too much work to handle in the meantime, burying and dissipating any potential anxieties. You think he's trying to have us not worry about it? I'm sure, yeah. But maybe that's not all. It could be that the Demon Lord wants to handle the aggressors with his nation alone. That or he doesn't see them as a major problem, but... Of course it was a problem. But the Demon Lord Rimuru was more focused on his grand future plans than any of that stuff. Caligulio and Minutes admired how bold a leader he was, and King Garzel likely felt the same way. The whole way Rimuru acted around them indicated that he didn't see the aggressors as much to sweat about. Maybe it was just a bluff, or maybe he really did feel that way. Caligulio did think he was just trying to keep them from worrying themselves sick, but even so, he had to agree with Minutes. If he's seriously thinking about dealing with the aggressors by himself, we'll need to find a way to assist him. At the very least, we need to prevent any attempt at an internal revolt. We can't have anyone dragging him down like that. Caligulio was ready to serve his leader. So the two of them left the club after drinking for around an hour. The next day, they put Masaki up on his palanquin and set off for home. The moment he reached the capital, Caligulio was swamped with work. Some regions of the city had been damaged during the war, but there was no need to think about rebuilding immediately. They planned to work on that in tandem with Rimuru and the Tempestians later on. No, the first order of business was reorganizing the military. All surviving, or resurrected, soldiers and officers were now safely back in the Empire, and he quickly gave them new duties. Maintaining order was top priority, so he kept an eye on Krishna's reports and sent soldiers out to any region facing unrest. Fortunately for him, some 700,000 soldiers and officers remained loyal to him. Even those who wished to move to Tempest were being cooperative with this effort. Rimuru, after all, had promised them jobs after the turmoil had subsided. "Don't make up your mind right now," he told a large group of them assembled at the Colosseum. "Just take your time and think it over, okay?" That's what he said after Rigard came out and presented a fairly detailed immigration plan to them all. Rimuru wasn't trying to convince any of them, hoping instead to respect their individual desires. But the 200,000-odd potential immigrants in the audience were pretty enthusiastic about the news. Aggressors? We'll rip those guys apart. Certainly, they were ready for a fight. And while they had lost the power in their souls, they still had their surgically enhanced bodies. Some of them still merited an A rank, so they were nothing to sniff at. So Caligulio wanted to figure out any way he could to keep the imperial capital peaceful. But then a bigger problem popped up. The real thorn in his side, as he'd predicted, was the nobility. Nobles from up and down were demanding an audience with him, putting a damper on his work. He wanted to turn them all down, but some of them were big names whose support he wanted for future purposes. Militz's overtures and Krishna's military coercion did what they were asked for as well, preventing any major crises from developing, but it certainly took a lot of stamina from Caligulio. Just then, though, the demon lord Rimuru sent over a lifesaver, Testarossa, that most beautiful of demons. The first job Testarossa took was delivering a speech to win over the masses, a talk that would soothe the frayed nerves of a shocked, defeated populace while fully ignoring the nobles. Caligulio worried that this was no job for a demon, a race practically born to strike fear in people's hearts. But he didn't need to, surprisingly enough. Demons lived off people's emotions, and if you wanted to cleanly remove the terror and anxieties from the minds of an entire populace, they were the most qualified group you could find. What a surprise! Here you are, Blanc, or Lady Testarossa, who put the Empire through so much pain and strife, and look at how much you clearly care for our people. Why wouldn't I? That is the job assigned to me by Sir Rimuru, our overlord. Well, yes, naturally, but I was expecting you to be rougher, or, I'm sorry, I mean that I didn't think you'd take such a reserved, moderate approach. Caligulio chose his words carefully around her, sweating. He regretted being too honest, but Testarossa didn't let it bother her. We can't afford to have Sir Rimuru gain a bad reputation around here, after all. Of course I'd be more careful with how I hold myself, but that winds up thinning out the effect, too. Trying to strike the right balance is tough, you know. If you eat up all of someone's emotions, that usually has a bad effect on them in some way. The observation made Caligulio wince. He certainly didn't want that, but Testarossa wouldn't make that sort of rookie mistake. She had ordered Moss to keep close track of her underlings, so success was basically a given. But she had a point, too. Taking the moderate approach made it difficult to fully control the emotions of a crowd. Between having lost close relatives in battle and a new emperor, many of the Empire's citizens were simply too frazzled to remain calm. Not all their sadness had gone away, and the buds of anxiety and dissent were still there to grow. Caligulio had peacekeeping forces in place at key places around the city, ensuring that any rioting or conflict was prevented before it could begin. If anyone defied you, it would be a lot cleaner and easier to just kill their whole clan, but... Ha ha ha. Very funny. She wasn't joking, Caligulio thought. It made him respect Rimuru, the one who'd sent Testarossa over, all the more. Blanc always meant business. So, in time, the citizens began to simmer down, with none of them foolish enough to attempt an armed rebellion. Seeing things progress to this point was a relief, but Testarossa already had other ideas in mind. She decided that, as the most effective and quickest way to provide mental care for the people, they had best introduce the new Emperor Masaiki to them before long, in other words, stage a coronation. If he could give a speech as well, Testarossa reasoned, the citizens would view it as the legitimate dawn of a new era. Huh? Me? Is that a problem? No. Never mind. Masaiki gratefully accepted the idea. There were tears in his eyes, but they were meaningless before Testarossa's smile. Oh? What are you doing, making Masaiki cry like that? It was Veilgrind who butted in. My, Testarossa calmly replied, what a regrettable way to put it. I'm not into that sort of play at all. The two beauties exchanged smiles. Their gazes smashed into each other, creating a fearsome pressure in the room. It was Masaiki and Caligulio who took the brunt of it. Masaiki held out, praying that he could leave soon. Caligulio, on the other hand, tried a little impromptu meditation, easing his heart to overcome this storm. But no matter what either of them truly wished for, the coronation was now a done deal. Countless citizens completely occupied the main square in front of the imperial palace. Masaiki was there, looking down at them from a balcony on one of its highest floors. He had come here via Veilgrind's teleportation, making this basically his first public appearance in the Empire. He was now dressed as an emperor should be, and as long as he kept his mouth shut, one could perhaps detect an air of dignity about him if they squinted hard enough. The appointed time was here. Caligulio began things with a few opening words, followed by minutes, the Prime Minister, offering a rundown of recent events. The Empire had faced a major defeat, and as a result, the previous Emperor Ludora had passed away. The new Emperor, Masaaki the Hero, had already been crowned, and through his actions, peace had been reached with Tempest. They would build a friendly relationship going forward, and they had also opened official relations with the Dwarven Kingdom. And so on. In order to prevent a recurrence of Michael's castle guard skill, they needed to convince the people that Ludora was at the root of all the Empire's problems. If they could refer to him as dead and reduce the number of his believers, that'd be even better. That was the context behind introducing Masaaki as the new emperor, but a large number of people had trouble swallowing this, openly asking why someone not even related by blood was taking the throne. Veilgrind stepped up to answer them. "Please quiet down, you silly fools. My name is Veilgrind. Veilgrind the Cardinal." Hearing the name of the Empire's guardian dragon gave every one of its citizens pause. Could it be? They all thought in unison. "By the laws of our imperial household, I hereby name Masaaki the Hero as our new emperor." As she spoke, Veilgrind unleashed her overwhelming dominance. An almost visible wave rolled over the audience, the famed cardinal aura, its divinity clear as day in anyone's eyes. Then, like it was an afterthought, she motioned in a certain direction, speaking to the people. "Behold, as we salute our new emperor." The moment she fell silent, the divine eyrie of fire began to spew lava. The massive volcanic eruption was easily visible from the center of the city. It was a little too gigantic to be called a salute, and while it was akin to playing with matches to Veilgrind, it shocked the common citizens speechless. Now there was no doubting it. Some of them might have had doubts, maybe they'd set things up in advance, employing magic or explosives to trigger the eruption, but it was a divine, sacred mountain doing the erupting. Engineering that without the permission of the flame dragon who called it home would lead to wrath too horrible to picture. No one who called this capital home would ever have attempted anything so stupid. And that wasn't all. Several bolts of molten lava shot out from the volcanic crater, reaching all the way to the capital, but they were all deflected by an invisible protective wall. It could be nothing but their guardian dragon in action. My God! It's her. The dragon god herself. Our empire's guardian dragon has manifested herself before our very eyes. The excitement was palpable. As time passed, they began to realize just how monumental these events were. Veilgrind herself had given her approval. At long last, they realized that Masaaki the Hero was now truly their emperor. And while Masaaki's center of popularity still lay in the Western nations, he was also well known around the empire. Whoa, are you serious? You mean Lightspeed Masaaki? Isn't Masaaki the most powerful of heroes the world has ever seen? Hell, no wonder the demon lord Rimuru couldn't say no to him. Praise was raining down, as if read off a script by a team of talented actors. That was Masaaki's power for you. He was famous everywhere, and now his unique skill had been powered up, extending over a broader range and having untold impacts on everyone that knew him. The result was the sort of cheering he had grown accustomed to. Maasa uki. Maasa ukiai. It was in perfect harmony, like the voice of every imperial subject was united as one. That's Emperor Masaaki to you, sillies, Veilgrind thought, but the emperor himself didn't seem to mind, so she let it slide. If anyone was truly livid about this, it was Testarossa. The citizens had the completely wrong idea that Rimuru wouldn't dare try to cross Masaaki, a thought that made her furious to the core, but she was the one who'd inadvertently led them to that conclusion. She couldn't complain about it to anyone here, so she just had to smile and put up with it. So Masaaki now had the people on his side. It went far easier than anyone had anticipated, and thanks to that, the name of the divinely ordained emperor of the Nascan Namrium Al-Maria United Eastern Empire became known to the entire world. The capital's residents, driven by new hope, regained their old energy. The pain of those who'd lost loved ones wouldn't be forgotten that easily, but even they were now taking new steps, moving on with their lives. The normal routine was returning, and to Caligulio, nothing could have been more joyful to see. But there was still a long way to go before he could truly relax. With the emperor having been officially named, those bothersome nobles were starting to show signs of activity. The nobles were Minutes's duty, and Caligulio wanted to palm off all responsibility for them on him, but that was just him being selfish, and the nobles didn't care who they reached out to as long as they were connected to the new emperor. That's why he kept getting hounded for appointments. He looked toward Testarossa for help. "This nation's nobles?" She matter-of-factly replied. "I don't think the great majority of them are any big problem." Caligulio didn't know what she meant, but he interpreted this to mean that Testarossa was making some key below-the-surface moves for him. Minutes was doing his job as well, so Caligulio decided to focus on what he could do instead. Then, before even a few days had passed, the requests for audiences began to dwindle. Excuse me, Lady Testarossa, but..." He assumed she was intimidating them into submission, but was too timid to ask. This stately lady elegantly enjoying some tea before him was Blanc, a demon feared by the Empire for ages. He still found that hard to believe, but it was the unvarnished truth. And no matter what vile, terrorizing methods she'd used, he wouldn't find it strange at all. "Oh? Well, that's mean. Why are you looking at me like I just threatened your life? I haven't done anything bad to you." All villains think that way, that they're different, somehow. Caligulio suddenly felt very small. Even though he was in his own office, it'd be impossible for him to say anything like "How could I not be afraid" to this virtual queen of the underworld. "No, ha ha ha, I don't have any suspicions about you or anything. I'm thankful every day for all the help you provide me. I was simply wondering what sort of methods you employed to keep the nobility at bay. I'd prefer if you didn't worry about that and just stuck to your own work, please." Testarossa took a sip of tea, then let out an elegant little sigh. "But all right. I'd feel guilty if I took all the credit for it, so I'll tell you. Let me begin with the conclusion: the nobles weren't any problem at all." "Yes, but why, is what I was curious about. First, the nobles of this empire are divided into 3 large factions. You're aware of that, of course?" "Yes, my lady. There's the military faction, led by Minutes's brother, the Marquis. There's the old money faction, which plays a central role in the emperor's support, and finally, there are the countryside nobles. The military was the keystone of the empire, one of its largest organizations, and many nobles tried to curry favor with this unmovable institution. That made them one of the largest, most powerful factions, but despite the fact that a Marquis, 2 ranks down from the top, was leading it, relatively few of its members were from high nobility. The old money faction, on the other hand, mainly consisted of the sort of highly connected nobles that had links to the emperor. They symbolized the concentration of power among their ranks. If you weren't at least an earl, you wouldn't even have a chance to speak in public among them. The regional nobles, meanwhile, were the least organized, just a rabble who'd come together because they wouldn't be allowed to speak up as individuals. They were only a group at all because they happened to share the same goals and little more. Testarossa nodded at Caligulio's rundown. "Right, exactly. Now, starting with the military faction, Minutes already has them wrapped around his finger, doesn't he?" No, he and his brother aren't getting along very well." "Oh? Not really. He was just all pouty, is all." "Huh?" "He had his elder brother take the Marquis title for him, and he found the responsibility to be crushing. He was just rebelling a bit, getting to grips with his position while still retaining his good name." Testarossa smiled a bit. "It's something weak people do all the time." "Is that true, my lady? How did you even find that out?" "Not telling, sorry. You've heard the expression 'what you don't know can't hurt you,' haven't you?" The truth was that Moss had investigated all that in a single night. He had no free time, what with Testarossa using and abusing him. Really, despite being a demon peer and lauded as the King of Ash, he arguably had it the worst out of anyone in Tempest. But he had no one to complain to, so he just kept his head down and dealt with the harsh work conditions that were placed upon him. Moss had snuck into the Marquis's residence and read through the journal hidden in his office. He'd then informed Testarossa of the secrets he'd found inside. Even the Marquis's strict security may as well have not existed, as far as Moss was concerned. He'd also uncovered a few useful tidbits of information that could help improve their relations. These he casually dropped in Minutes' lap. This was clearly a criminal act, but to someone who didn't have a clear understanding of what bad was, it barely counted as a crime. Ah yes, ha ha ha. I'll trust in you, then, Lady Testarossa. It'd be boorish of me to inquire further, wouldn't it? Caligulio ran from the question. It was a smart decision. Whatever the background circumstances were, Minutes was on his way to patching things up with his brother, and if so, all was well. Best to just focus on the final results. All right. So that's the military faction. What about the others? Well, the countryside nobles demonstrated to me that they're ready to submit to you. Huh? Since when? Oh, they fell in place immediately. The most important thing to them, after all, is that people can live in peace without starving. The Empire's rural areas are well stabilized by now, so the only concerns they had left were about our political direction. I see. And by the way, do you know how the rural nobles fund themselves? Well, mainly with the crops they harvest in each region. They retain what they need, pay their taxes, and then sell the remainder to their affiliated merchants. The revenue from that keeps the regional lords funded, is how I understand it. Yes, that's mostly right, but you're wrong on one aspect. This was starting to feel bizarre to Caligulio. Why was someone like him, at the peak of the imperial military, receiving a lecture in economics from the demon that had put the empire through so much pain? He didn't know, and it confused him. Why does a demon know this much about human economic policy, huh? I was educated in it as a lower-level country noble, but I don't think most top-class military officers would know much about it. And to think he didn't have it fully right, either. There were also regional handicrafts and specialty products, but that didn't seem like the correct answer. Caligulio didn't think of Testarossa as someone who would normally keep finding fault with him like this. So what is it? The underground trade. What? He couldn't help but exclaim. There was no way black market trade would be allowed in the Empire. He trusted in that, but the bluntness of her response threw him. Oh, is that strange to you? Well, of course. The Emperor of our land wields his power to ensure the equality of all his citizens. The nobility is a different matter, of course, but even a commoner can rise up in life through military service. I know all that. I'm not talking about surface matters. The black market is a necessity for practical business. Do you know why? If she was calling it a necessity, Testarossa must have meant it. But Caligulio still just couldn't believe it. Black market trading was tantamount to treason against the emperor. If it were that rampant, imperial secret agents would have picked up on it by now. There was no way the late Lieutenant Kondo would have overlooked it, for example. They feared him as the stalker of the halls of information. Caligulio doubted he'd have just let this slip past him. I don't believe it, he blurted out. Are you saying Lieutenant Kondo just let this slide? Testarossa gave him a chiding look. Are you really that hard-headed? He did let it slide, because it wasn't a bad thing at all. What do you mean? Well, as a merchant, I'm sure being affiliated with a noble sounds nice, but who you get to sell to is basically dictated by the title of your employer. Do you think the merchants of low-ranked nobles can compete with their brethren serving earls and dukes? The answer is no. It's impossible. You're forced to do the bidding of whoever holds power over you. And that's where underground merchants come in. Groups like the Echidna Club that ruled over the imperial black market, along with their successors, the Cerberus Secret Society, they were all able to exist because they were seen as necessary. Caligulio could feel the blindfold coming off. As Testarossa put it, merchants had a need to be free. They'd never aggressively pursue profit if they were working for a fixed salary. Trying to restrict that by force would just have been met with resistance, and besides, it had put the customers they served in a bind. Kondo knew that, so he'd never tried to seriously intervene in the black market. The same was even true for human trafficking, as publicly illegal as it was. If a village was facing famine and could no longer keep itself fed, there was a need to reduce the number of mouths. While legally forbidden, it had to be done, or a great many people would die, and if it came to that extreme, selling them off gave them a better chance of surviving than any other resort. That was a rather extreme example, but one that had been seen several times in the empire's history. Inconvenient truths like that were all over the place, treated as open secrets by the government. One big problem was trade with foreign nations. Since the empire had never so much as acknowledged the sovereignty of countries besides itself, foreign trade was officially prohibited. This, however, wasn't something that any sane economic policy would allow to exist for very long. And that was how groups like Cerberus had taken root in the Western nations. Testarossa dispassionately lectured Caligulio about all this. He wailed to himself about why a demon was so up-to-date on such things. It made him feel like an oblivious idiot, and it saddened him. "Well, thank you very much for the detailed rundown. I appreciate it." "Not at all. But regardless, that made handling the regional nobles pretty simple, you see. I explained to them that free trade would be fully allowed going forward, and they all lined up to join our side. Plus, as Sir Rimuru proceeds with his plans, we'll be laying rails between the Empire's regional cities as well. That'll ensure the wealth gets spread across more of the Empire as a whole instead of being concentrated in a small handful of cities." Between all of that, they readily pledged their support for Emperor Masaaki. Caligulio was certainly convinced. The Empire was home to some cutting-edge scientific advances, but they didn't have the time or money to connect all its cities. The reason was obvious: the great majority of the imperial budget went to R&D and the military. The transport of food and goods was also important, but the supply network only extended to the cities near the capital. Deliveries from the far regions were instead made via magic or airship. Now these left-behind cities were a part of Rimuru's development plans. And once they had been informed of this, it was easy to win the favor of the regional lords. This negotiation hinged on a huge amount of money and labor streaming into these regions, but Rimuru and Testarossa could make all of that possible. They had researched the economic conditions of these lords, using that knowledge to their advantage in the talks. Caligulio was impressed. They weren't a disloyal lot to start with, but with this thorough of an approach, they were receiving fabulous results. He resolved to revise his own approach in the future. "So that just leaves the old money." "Indeed. And, knowing how you work, I presume you've built a dossier outlining all their illegal deeds?" By this point, Testarossa had Caligulio's full trust. He didn't know what kind of scheme she had hatched, but if she said it was no problem, he was certain that she was right. "Don't put words in my mouth, now. You don't see anyone foolish enough to commit outright felonies these days in the Empire. A lot of cleanup work took place over the past few decades, and I've determined that much of it was Kondo's doing." So the real villains among the nobility had already been purged. Testarossa had been stationed in the Empire for a while now, but she felt that people around here were generally calmer in spirit than they used to be. A little research gave her the reason: it was because the truly abhorrent crimes had largely ceased to be committed. All that remained were necessary evils like Cerberus and small-time villains that could be safely ignored. "But how did you cajole the old money to our side, then?" "Well, I actually have a conference scheduled for this afternoon. I plan to reach a final agreement with them there, and I'd like you to join me, please." That was a clear order. Testarossa was supposed to be serving as Caligulio's assistant, but he didn't mind this at all. Faced with this obvious difference in talent and skill, all he could do was nod at her words. Only 4 people were in the reception room: Minutes, the organizer of this meeting, Caligulio, the secretary of the military, Testarossa, the diplomat from their partners in Tempest, and Mithra Hilmanard, head of the old money nobles and their current negotiation partner. Mithra was in his early 30s, still young, and some might have wondered if he was too inexperienced to be leading an entire faction like this. But that didn't apply to him, for he had virtually every talent one could think of. Mithra's mother was once queen, the partner of the emperor before Ludora. This made her Ludora's biological mother. The empire's imperial palace employed a unique system where the role of empress, the legal wife of the emperor, was not a position anyone could take. That role in the emperor's life belonged only to Veelgrind. Instead, several queens lived in the inner palace, competing against each other for supremacy. These women were voluntarily offered by the nobility, and their bloodlines were all impeccable in terms of noble rank. Whichever of these queens became pregnant with the emperor's child first was deemed the winner, welcomed in as the official queen of the empire. Their child, after all, was promised to be the heir to the throne. Ludora himself had had several queen candidates of his own ensconced inside his palace, but he'd never favored any of them. They were sent over by powerful nobles hoping their daughter would be named queen, but in the end, they had all been sent back before any child could be conceived. There was discussion about the new emperor inheriting them, but it was decided that Masayuki had no need for this system, and this decision was made by a figure whose identity would likely remain a mystery for all time. Regardless, Mithra's mother was one of the winners of the inner palace. She had completed the major feat of delivering Ludora, earning her the loftiest of reputations for all time. As a reward, she was offered two options. She could either stay in the palace, exercising her extensive influence while Ludora grew up, or she could accept a staggering monetary payoff and marry herself off to the clan of her choice. No stops were left unpulled when handling the emperor's mother. Her words held great authority across the palace, and even as she left that palace, she was never to be disrespected. Thus she didn't hesitate to take her leave and marry the Duke of Hilmanard. The child that resulted was Mithra Hilmanard, which meant Ludora was his half-brother. This gave Mithra unshakable power, enough to make people kowtow the moment they caught sight of him. He had a villainous visage, a face that suggested brutal violence might come at any time, and it daunted anyone who saw it. He had no eyebrows, and one glance from him could strike fear in the hearts of whoever it landed on, robbing them of any desire to defy him. He was neither over nor underweight, and he wasn't particularly tall, but his sheer dominance was a force to be reckoned with. Even the very highest of nobility felt something ominous about him. They suspected he was up to unscrupulous dealings in the black market, or that crossing him even once would make their lives forfeit. That was what made him so qualified to lead the old money faction, that force of dignity which refused to bend to anyone else. In a fight, Caligulio would undoubtedly beat him. That was true even before the general had gone through his awakening. But it took more than sheer muscle to survive in this world. You couldn't expect a decent life unless you had ample food, clothing, and shelter, and if you rebelled against Mithra, you were guaranteed to lose all three. What a monster to negotiate with, Caligulio thought. I had aimed to run the military someday, but now that I'm doing it, it's all too clear how hard a job it is. I can't believe I have to try dealing with freaks of nature like this. Minutes was here, so it'd likely work out in the end, but if it were a one-on-one negotiation, he'd have been on the ropes. But this time, they had a valuable helper on hand. Lady Testarossa, huh? She frightens me profoundly, but I couldn't ask for a better ally. And now that I know she's the fearsome Blanc herself, I don't think anyone could ever beat us. Mithra before him was a scary sight, but Testarossa was scarier. That thought helped him regain his serenity. Newly calm, he recalled what the demon had told him a moment ago. Well, hold on 1 minute. Lady Testarossa said most of the nobles wouldn't be a problem. Does that mean Sir Mithra is one of the problems? But that's strange. Kondo, after all, would never show any mercy, not even to His Majesty's half-brother. Does that mean Sir Mithra isn't up to anything nefarious after all? He doubted it. It just seemed so impossible in his mind. Mithra scared people precisely because he was seen as this untouchable villain. If he made everyone fear and revere him like this at first sight, there's no way he'd be someone normal. The clock reached the appointed time, bonging loudly, the signal for the conference to begin. So you're the hooligans attempting to usurp the throne? Let me hear why you've called me here. This pompous question was raised by Mithra. One moment, Your Grace, replied Minutes, catching the blow. That is all a misunderstanding. What is? It's the truth, is it not? We are following the official procedures of imperial household law. I would like very much for you not to call it usurping the throne. Oh, sure. Don't get cocky with me just because you have Lady Veilgrind as an ally. Don't be ridiculous, Minutes bellowed. Not even someone as calm as him could shut his eyes to this affront. Certainly, from an outside perspective, it must have looked like Veilgrind was siding with the Empire. But that was a very wrong assumption to make. The truth was actually the other way around. They were only able to maintain this peace because they'd finally managed to get on Veilgrind's good side for once. Loose lips sink ships, as they say, but with Veilgrind, the consequences were far worse. She could destroy entire nations, literally wipe them off the map. Keeping her happy was entirely up to Masayuki, and while he seemed to have a gentle disposition, what if he was more selfish instead? It made Caligulio shudder to think of it. Sir Mithra, Prime Minister Minutes is telling you the truth. Lady Veilgrind is a friend to Emperor Masayuki, but she is not an ally of our empire itself. If Emperor Masayuki wished it, she wouldn't hesitate to destroy our entire country. Yes, exactly. And I've even heard her state that if a nation ever burdened Emperor Masayuki, she would immediately burn it to ash. We cannot afford to anger her, no matter what. You expect me to believe that? No, I can't blame you for not believing it. So, please, let's begin by hearing your opinion on this subject. Heh. You mean whether I side with the Empire, or oppose it? Not that. What? Minutes promptly answered Mithra's arrogant question. He then proceeded to tell Mithra his true feelings. Listen to me. I don't want this to get out, but I'd like you to understand how I actually feel about everything, Your Grace. That is why I want to tell you the truth. Quit beating around the bush. If you want my opinion, just ask for it. In that case, let me ask a question first. Duke Mithra, do you want to rule over the Empire? Or would you like to join hands and help us out? What? Not even Mithra had expected this. He had been expecting a tough negotiation, but this sounded like they were perfectly okay with handing the Empire over to him. And this interpretation was absolutely correct. Minutes had become Prime Minister through an improbable course of events. It was a role he'd basically had no choice but to accept. If Mithra wanted the job instead, Minutes would gladly give it to him. Stabilizing the Empire was priority number one, and that had largely been achieved. Minutes pictured a lot of room for change within the Empire's political structure. Caligulio had seen through Minutes' thoughts, too. Yes, I know we'd like his cooperation as we try to unite the nobles on our side. Letting Sir Mithra take this job wouldn't break our promises at all. But isn't that a little unfair, Minutes? This, he thought as he gritted his teeth, was exactly why Minutes' brother had a grudge against him. What, are you saying you'll give the Prime Ministership to me? I appreciate how quickly you picked up on that. Now, will you listen to our viewpoint for a moment? Very well. Mithra reluctantly nodded, perhaps sensing he was out of the loop on some matters. So Minutes began to speak. As he put it, Masayuki himself did not want the position of emperor, but if he abandoned the empire right now, the resulting political instability could lead to serious disruption. They were also aware of a new, unknown enemy stalking them, and if they ignored it, it would create serious trouble for everyone in time. In light of that, Tempest and the Dwarven Kingdom had also welcomed Masayuki as emperor. Veilgrind would listen only to the will of Masayuki. To put it another way, if he didn't become emperor, she wouldn't hesitate to abandon the entire empire, and even if she didn't strike against it, losing their guardian dragon posed a huge problem. Along those lines, it was far better for all the citizens if Masayuki accepted his invitation to the throne. As I stated, Minutes concluded, His Majesty himself sees the throne as a heavy burden to bear. If someone were to rule in his place, I think it would be welcomed without major complaint. This made sense to Mithra. He understood that Veelgrin's affinity was a vital question for the Empire. Masayuki was a must in order to keep her on their side. If they didn't have him on the throne, she might very well leave the Empire entirely. This also meant, however, that as long as he remained emperor, it didn't really matter if someone else actually ran politics. In fact, perhaps it'd be better for the Empire's growth if they didn't tether him to his post too much. The demon lord Rimuru, Testarossa added with a sweet smile, wishes to build a fruitful relationship with Sir Masayuki as well. If Sir Masayuki is to become emperor, then Sir Rimuru will provide the maximum amount of assistance that he can. So I hope it's clear to you that this is not at all an attempted usurpation of the throne. Mithra had been informed of that aspect in advance. It was known across the Empire that despite having trounced them in combat, Rimuru wasn't demanding much in the way of reparations. He wanted friendly ties going forward, and if that were the case, Mithra didn't see any reason to doubt Testarossa. So what was the right move to make? He had been given two choices, but he wasn't limited strictly to those. If there were other paths available, he had the freedom to take one. However, as Mithra half resigned himself to his fate, it was unlikely that any other path would bring him victory. Would Mithra lead imperial politics as prime minister, or would he take Minit's side and make the nobles follow him? To be honest, Mithra wasn't terribly interested in the decision. What he really wanted was to hole himself up in his mansion and devote himself to his passion of painting. Between his noble bloodline and his power as duke, Mithra was seen as a born ruler, but that was all a great misunderstanding. His mother had been beautiful enough to earn the love of Lodora's father, after all. She was a strong-willed woman, her aura resembling Veelgrin's in a way, but that was only on the surface. Despite that dominating atmosphere, she was actually a very placid woman. If she hadn't been, she would have taken position as queen the moment she'd given birth to Lodora. She was allowed to enjoy every luxury possible as Lodora's mother, for the short period until he attained full independence, but she wanted her freedom over any of that. It was a highly unusual choice to make, but not long after she earned that freedom, she fell in love with Duke Basa Hilmenard. Basa was a handsome young man, leading to rumors among the general public that it was Mithra's mother who wooed him first, the former queen having her way with whatever man she wanted. But it was absolutely the other way around, and it was pure love that brought them together and led to Mithra's birth. They were still passionately in love with each other, although that didn't matter here. I have no great desire to be a politician, either. Dealing with all these office seekers and hangers-on makes me sick. But, much to Mithra's chagrin, he was a very popular, charismatic figure. He was smart, too, to the point that none of his more underhanded schemes had ever been exposed. This had given him a great number of devotees, and many of his affairs would go running off in their own directions before he could do anything about them. The worst example of this was when a certain earl had lost his social standing thanks to Mithra. Mithra had accidentally bumped shoulders with him one day. The earl wasn't watching where he was going, but he still refused to apologize about it. At the time, Mithra was still in his early 20s, so the earl no doubt saw him as unworthy of attention. He might have acted differently if he'd known Mithra was the son of a duke, but that's just speculation at this point. "You," he bellowed. "I'm an earl, you know. Where are your manners?" Mithra still recalled how he'd just stared at the earl in response. If he's this angry over something so small, he thought, perhaps he has a calcium deficiency. He had just learned the term from an otherworlder friend of his. What a bother, he muttered to himself. He wasn't a duke yet by this point, which meant the earl outclassed him. At the same time, he'd been taught that he should never bow his head to someone below his family's title, so he legitimately wasn't sure what to do. That's why he said those words, and things really did become a bother. "You're bothering Sir Mithra. What is a mere earl doing, haranguing Sir Mithra like this? What a sorry sight this is." Mithra's friends were already causing a commotion. Just then, a group of knights clad in black appeared from some unknown hiding spot. Several of them accosted the earl. The panicked earl only then recalled who Mithra actually was. but that realization had come too late for him. The captain of the night team went up to Mithra, saluting him. "Allow us to decide what to do with him." "All right, sure." Mithra couldn't say anything else. The newspapers the next day were filled with evidence of assorted injustices and fraudulent behavior on the Earl's part. Whether all the crimes were true or fabricated, Mithra didn't know. The only clear truth was that the Earl was soon arrested and stripped of his title. It went without saying that the encounter made people dread Mithra more than ever. A mere brush of the shoulder had brought an Earl to his doom. It taught Mithra just how much power he had, a lesson he'd find hard to forget. Mithra would later have similar things happen on several occasions. He'd never meant any of it, but before he realized it, he had become one of the most formidable, awe-inspiring nobles on the scene. From those experiences, Mithra knew the power of his words. It turned him into a quiet man. On this occasion as well, his dukedom's talented intelligence officers informed him that Ludora had, indeed, disappeared. Whether he was dead or just fleeing the throne didn't matter. What did matter was whether Vielgrind, the Empire's guardian dragon, would preside over Masayaki the hero as the new emperor. As the report he was given stated, the identity of the mysterious marshal is believed to be none other than Vielgrind the Cardinal. She is attached to Sir Masayaki, and that likely means he has inherited the soul of the true Emperor Ludora. Anyone with even the slightest reasoning ability would have understood the hopelessness of trying to defy this. Unlike most royal families, bloodline wasn't a major factor when it came to imperial succession. The public might attach a lot of importance to it, but to the true power brokers in this empire, it was known that Ludora's soul was the most vital factor. Mithra, as a duke, was naturally aware of all this. "If we play this wrong, it'd mean more than the end of my noble line. If my followers decide to riot over it, it'd be their lives at stake. I need to brace myself and take action." Mithra was an intelligent noble, and this was the obvious choice for him. Ideally, he'd like to keep a healthy distance away from politics while retaining the influence he held over the nobility. If he could keep hold of his noble title, money would never be a problem for him. His stipend would be enough to let him paint in peace without forcing himself into government work. It certainly wasn't impossible. So that was Mithra's ultimate dream. Plan B for him was to retire back to his homeland. Focusing on the administration of just his countryside dukedom, sticking strictly to serving as lord of his dominion, that'd work, too. It'd keep his days somewhat occupied, but there'd still be time to paint. It'd keep the number of annoying people in his life to a minimum, too. He saw it as a good compromise. The absolute worst case was anything that sparked Vielgrind's rage. That alone had to be avoided at all costs, and that's why he was fighting so hard over this right now. So Mithra had decided to propose a plan of action. He'd use his notoriety to exile himself from the capital. He'd be his usual, arrogant self, enough that people would think he was just too much trouble to bother with. If enough of them turned against him, they could then contrive some sort of story, at which point he'd pretend to fly into such a rage that he'd give up his seat. Negotiations would be cut off, but then Mithra would pretend to realize the position he'd put himself in, and flee the capital to save face. That was the kind of story he'd wanted to concoct, but instead, Minutes was giving him these two crazy options. "Do you want to rule over the empire? Or would you like to join hands and help us out?" The answer was no to both questions. But saying that, he thought, was a bad idea. So Minutes continued talking. Testarossa, the diplomat from Tempest, joined in as well, trying to justify their position. But Mithra didn't need all that explanation. He knew all of it in advance. It was vital in any negotiation, after all, to come in with a firm grasp of all the facts. "Well, what now? I don't want to choose either of those options. Get involved with national politics in the current state of affairs, and I'll just work myself to death, I'm sure of it. If I put in any more hours than I already do, I won't just lose my painting time. I'll have no time to play with my beloved daughter, even." Mithra did, indeed, have a 3-year-old daughter, as cute as could be. He also had a newborn son, But what troubled him was his wife's behavior. The moment his son was born, she'd stopped so much as looking Mithra in the eye. She was the daughter of a marquis, and a woman Mithra had fallen in love with at first sight. He'd asked her to become his wife, and they were living together the very next day. But now she was distant, always brooding over something, and it had unnerved him as of late. Their marriage had begun with some sense of cold formality at first, but given the circumstances, that was to be expected. She had given him the son he had long waited for, and he wanted to take his time and help the love between them grow, but... Yes. I have to steadfastly refuse this, or I won't even have enough time to talk to my wife any longer. I don't care that much what happens to the empire, but I have to keep my own family from falling apart. Mithra steeled his resolve once more. He wanted today to end with an amicable agreement, but now he'd have to inject at least a little strife into it. It was time for his answer. This is pointless. You're not usurping the throne? Save that nonsense for someone with the time for it, please. And, Lady Testarossa, was it? What right do you have to comment on our empire's internal affairs? I know the empire lost to you in the war. But we've already established peace with you, in exchange for our territorial airspace and a treaty between our two nations. We now have diplomatic relations with each other, but do you think you have the right to interfere with our very sovereignty? Going this far all at once was a risk, but Mithra still committed to it. The person he was rebuking was the chief diplomat of Tempest, a nation with a terrifying amount of soft and hard power. She was the Demon Lord's fully ordained representative in foreign lands, and Mithra couldn't deny the possibility of another war if he angered her. He was fully aware that Testarossa was actually the Demon Blanc, and that he was being astonishingly rude with a great demon feared by the entire empire. Humph. I won't tell you to leave this room, however. I'm sure that your leader has an interest in the future direction of his friends, after all. Well, I'm deeply obliged to you, then. Mithra had been hoping to anger her, but she just shrugged it off. It threw him. I thought she'd reject me out of hand if I went this far. What's she after? He didn't want her flying into a rage on him, but her staying this calm was just as unexpected. Getting her too angry would be forfeiting his life. Saying what he had just now made him feel like a few years had been shaved off his lifespan, so going any further required due consideration. What now? Should I take another step? It was one boundlessly scary step to take. So he decided to aim his saber elsewhere. I am the half-brother of the great Emperor Ludora, you realize. We don't even know if he's alive or dead yet, but here you are, deciding by yourselves to name this total stranger Masayaki to the throne. And now you're shameless enough to ask for my assistance? I completely fail to comprehend what is going on in your mind. Mithra kept talking, raising his voice a little. Depending on how she reacted, he'd need to change his tune at a moment's notice. The real battle was now in progress. But unfortunately, his bet backfired on him in the worst possible way. Oh dear, are you voicing displeasure about my decision? Because if you think you can avoid any consequences because you're related to Ludora, I'll need to teach you how wishful that thinking is. Jiga. Lady Veal grinned. A silent scream emanated from Mithra's mind. He was so shocked, he thought his soul was going to leap out from his throat. This was beyond merely losing a debate, he was completely cornered. He knew it was all over now, and the thought made him feel oddly relieved. That, perhaps, was why he felt driven to simply say what was on his mind from now on. Hair. You are Lady Veelgrind, our former marshal and the guardian dragon of the Empire, are you not? I wasn't aware that you would be part of this conference. It's an honor to meet you. First, he'd demonstrate that he wasn't particularly impressed by her. Deep down, he wanted to run from the room immediately, but it had already dawned on him that this was impossible. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't feel I'm worthy of the throne or anything, but considering all the people who call the Empire home, I think installing me as Emperor would be the best option we have. Now Masayaki was there, too, coming through the door right after Veelgrind. This hadn't factored into Mithra's plans at all. The way things were going, he was forced to assume that his life was forfeit by now. but something still bothered him. "Ho? You seem rather unconfident, Your Majesty. Do you think you could take the place of my half-brother like that?" He was trying to talk down to Masayuki as he spoke, but he half meant what he said, too. If he was going to be executed either way, he thought, he might as well try to bluff a little more. "Ha ha ha. I was just a normal student until a little bit ago, you know. It's not a matter of being confident or not. I never even imagined being an emperor before." "Hair. Pathetic. You think you can lead a mighty empire that way?" Mithra's lips were moving on cruise control, but... Huh? What kind of nonsense is he talking? I didn't realize from the way Minutes and Caligulio reacted that this isn't what my investigating staff told me. Mithra's spies had told him the new emperor was an ambitious, power-hungry young man. He had overwhelming support from the citizenry, and even the demon lord Raimoru, who couldn't have cared less about the empire, was reportedly an avowed fan of his. The nervously chuckling young man in front of him didn't seem to match the description at all. What's going on here? Mithra unconsciously turned toward Masayuki again. Well, to be frank, that's not really my thing, no. Huh? Mithra couldn't help but groan. He wasn't alone. Why, Your Majesty? I've asked you time and again to hold yourself with some more dignity. Indeed. Recruiting Sir Mithra to our side would have a great effect on the future of our government. We need people we can share the workload with, for our sakes as well. Minutes and Caligulio were both entreating him. If that's how he's acting around me, it's already too late. Asking me to join them after hearing this travesty of a conversation. Mithra couldn't have felt more strongly against it if he tried. But he also thought that leaving this room alive would be better than a summary execution. He was no fool, he understood that he no longer had any freedom in these talks. You silly fools. Have you forgotten that you promised not to force Masayuki into anything? No, Veal grinned, they're not forcing me into anything. It's all right. Sir Masayuki. Your Majesty, Veal grinned sounded just a little miffed. Masayuki hurriedly tried to assuage her, much to the eternal gratitude of Minutes and Caligulio. Oh, and Masayuki? I've been meaning to ask you, would you mind referring to me by the nickname Grin from now on? Okay. So, Grin. Hee. How nice of you, Masayuki. You're so honest with me, not at all like Ludora. If you don't mind how Caligulio and Minutes act around you, then it's nothing I need to intervene in. How fortunate for the both of you. Yes, my lady. Thank you. I will never forget this favor. Vealgrin seemed to be over it. That was a relief. Mithra, watching all this, marveled at how tough their jobs must be. I see. They want to reel me into this for more reasons than merely stabilizing the government. What they really want is someone who'll deal with Lady Vealgrind and take the heat off themselves a little. Still, though, this Masayuki. Mithra began to see the Emperor as someone very much like him. And, again, he wasn't alone. Now, can I call you just Mithra? I still have not accepted it, but you appear to be Emperor, yes. You may therefore call me whatever you want. All right, then. What do you think of me, Mithra? Do I just look like a normal young man to you, maybe? What are you talking about? You are the Emperor. There's nothing normal about you. No, I'm not talking about that. I just want you to take a deep breath and give me your honest opinion. Again, what do you mean? Mithra couldn't understand what Masayuki wanted to say. But the results of this exchange would set his fate in stone. You think I'm just an average kid, don't you? Are you asking if I think you're improper for the throne? Then to be brutally frank with you, you are a far cry from my half-brother. You don't have the capacity to lead anyone, much less an entire empire. Saying it would no doubt spell his doom. But Mithra was already in a state of sheer desperation. If he was already helpless in Vealgrin's hands, he at least wanted it to be painless. As furious as Vealgrind undoubtedly was, he assumed she would at least afford him that luxury. But the reaction was even greater than that, not from Vealgrind, but from Masayuki. Mithra. That's amazing. You're exactly the kind of person I needed. What? Mithra replied, unsure what Masayuki meant. I mean, a suddenly roused Masayuki said, thanks to my ability or whatever, people just assume I'm this totally amazing person. He excitedly described his unique skill chosen one, and all the suffering it had caused him. It had later evolved into the ultimate skill Lord of Heroes, a truly astounding ability. Anyone could see that giving the highest seat in a government to a complete amateur was a bad idea, but for some reason, Masayuki was always an exception in people's minds. What? No, what I'm saying is that having someone like who understands what I really am, it makes me so happy. Tears began to fall from Mithra's eyes. Masayuki. No, Your Majesty. The young man's pain was not unfamiliar to him. He understood it well himself. And that wasn't all. As he now realized, if he was capable of understanding Masayuki, perhaps the opposite was true as well. Hey, no Majesty stuff, please. I just thanked you for seeing who I really am. Ah yes, exactly. Yes, I understand you very well. I've experienced much of the same pain myself. Oh? Listen to me. There was one time when all I said was what a bother, and that was enough to get a man arrested. Honestly, there were times when I thought about never saying another word my whole life. That was impossible, of course, but it's really hard, not being able to say what's truly on your mind. I totally understand you. In my case, I tried doing that, but it just doesn't come across right. It gets interpreted in all these funny ways to just boost my reputation even more. It's like, give me a break, I wake up one morning and now I'm emperor? A scary thought, yes. Right? It really is scary. My old friend Jinrei was just the worst when I first met him. He understands me a lot better now, but he actually tried to pick a fight with Rimuru on my behalf, you know. I can't count the number of times I wanted him to quit saying my name all the time. Ah yes, that's very familiar to me. That's why I didn't bring anyone with me here. I'm too afraid to. There's just no telling what might come out of their mouths. It had happened on more than one occasion, an out-of-line remark from one of his attendants leading to a breakdown in negotiations. For this one, at least, he simply couldn't afford that risk. It's so common, isn't it? I thought I was the only one this whole time. Ha ha ha. We've both had it hard. Now Masayuki and Mithra were chatting like they'd forgotten anyone else was in the room. They were all smiles now, and the buds of friendship were already forming. I suppose that carrying Ludora gave your mother some manner of immunity to it. I've lived for a very long time, but I've never seen anything like this. Veilgrind was just as surprised. But, out of respect for their newfound friendship, she decided not to remark on it. With Masayuki and Mithra now fast friends, all ill feelings were banished. Mithra was now promising his cooperation, but since he didn't want any direct involvement with politics, he would remain leader of the noble old money faction and provide Masayuki with behind-the-scenes support instead. He wanted to keep his valuable free time, and as they spoke to each other, it became clear that this was the best way to move forward. I will continue to manage the nobility dissatisfied with the current situation, but should I find someone with the right talents, I will endeavor to suggest that they offer you their assistance. Thanks. We're really short on good people. That would be better for the military as well. Needless rebellion could cause us to lose good personnel. If you're helping us out, Sir Mithra, we can take our time to win over any potential rebellious elements. So things worked out fairly well in the end. With that, the conference was over. One moment, Testarossa said as Mithra stood up. May I have a word with you, Sir Mithra? His heart skipped a beat. He recalled the venom he'd spat in Testarossa's direction as well. He thought that had faded into the background, given the amicable terms they'd come to, but perhaps he was just kidding himself. Yes? He said, trying to keep his voice calm as he sat back down. Our conversation just now left me curious, so I did a little investigating. You have a secret skill, don't you? Huh? No, I have nothing like that. Mithra tried to deny it once he realized the topic wasn't what he thought it would be. Testarossa cut him off. Oh, don't get me wrong. It's an unconscious type. Ah yes, I see, it's the unique skill, wicked scoundrel. It's the type you can inherit and pass across generations, too. From your father, probably. Did people fear him? They were terrified by him. Mithra had been told that this was the destiny of every eldest son in the Hilmanard family. Well, if you become aware of it, I think you'll be able to use it to your advantage in future negotiations. Telling him this was the sort of meddling Testarossa wasn't generally known for. She almost never did something like that, but she could be kind to the humans she'd taken a liking to. I had that sort of power? You sure do. I won't tell you how to use it, but, here, let me give you another big gift. Your wife's just as scared of you, too. What? That's silly. She's a very graceful woman. We've never had an argument. I haven't even raised my voice once around her. Mithra laughed off the idea. Testarossa gave him a chuckle. Oh, it's very true. It's a piece of information I kept in my pocket, just in case it gave me an advantage in this negotiation. Your mother was probably immune to it, so it wasn't any problem for her, but the same can't be said for your wife. That's impossible, but she's still family to you, Caligulio told a disturbed Mithra. You understand that, don't you, Sir Mithra? Right, yes, Minutes added. You just had a second child, didn't you? I'm sure your wife loves you very much. Veal grinned, however, was there to immediately shoot them down. As cruel as it was still the truth. Oh, you silly people. That second child is the son that you've been eagerly waiting for, isn't he? From your wife's perspective, she's given birth to a lawful heir, so now her job's done. Have you even told her your true feelings? How do you mean? Have you ever said you love her? Have you ever told her out loud, thanks for giving me this child? Come to think of it, Mithra couldn't recall doing anything like that. His face turned pale as he realized his foolishness. Putting your love into words like that, Testarossa said, is actually a very important way to ensure your love lasts. Why don't you take this opportunity to express to her exactly how you feel? Mithra eagerly nodded at her. I'll be on my way, then, he said before darting out of the room. He made it home just as his wife was about to leave the house. He had just barely made it in time, and, understanding well the warning Veelgrind and Testarossa had given him, he heeded their advice. It saved him from having to experience a painful divorce. Ever since then, Mithra was eternally thankful for the two of them. He vigorously supported the new emperor in whatever he did, becoming one of the empire's staunchest supporters. With that, all three major noble factions were in the pocket of the new Emperor Masayuki. They had anticipated that it would take several years to stabilize the new government, but they wound up pulling it off in just a few months. The night after I befriended Sir Mithra. So Lady Testarossa was right all along, eh? Pretty much. Some of that was luck, but having the demon Lord Raimoru's support counted for a lot. So did Lady Veelgrin's presence. I was enjoying a celebratory drink with Minutes at a restaurant in the Empire. Our concerns with the nobility were now largely taken care of, and the only problem that remained was the aggressors. We had our spies deployed across the Empire to look into them, reporting back on whatever seemed amiss. I was sure they'd tell me if they found something, and we also had the reorganized Imperial Knights stationed in our provincial towns. We couldn't let our guards down yet, but we could at least breathe a little easier now. As a result, I intended to drink to my heart's content tonight. We had a lot of fun, talking about the things we'd gone through and discussing our future hopes for the Empire. Looking back, I never thought I'd become this friendly with Minutes. He was a reliable worker, but I never meant for us to become close personal friends. Now he's an important war buddy of mine, a trustworthy friend helping me support Emperor Masayuki. We were carrying on into the evening, getting just the right level of tipsy, when Minutes broached a new topic with me. By the way, how does it feel, having the kind of power that'd let you beat anybody? I thought about it for a moment. A little empty, actually. I feel like I have no goals left to reach for. Then you won't need this anymore, will you? Minutes presented me with an envelope. It was decently thick, presumably filled with documents. What's this? Don't open it here, he softly stated before emptying his glass. He stood up, placing the glass on the table. Whoa, are you done for the night? Yeah. That envelope contains a report on you. I did some digging a few years back, so I'd have something on you just in case. You can have it, though. I sure don't need it now. There were a few points that bothered me, so I'm having a little extra investigation done right now. It was kind of a surprise to me, though, so maybe you're better off not knowing. If you're not interested in your own past, go ahead and just burn it without reading it. Minutes offered no more explanation than that. He just waved and headed out instead of answering any of my questions, never even turning back as he left. I was alone now, and in no mood to drink any further. Minutes' words stuck with me. These papers definitely had something to do with me, some weakness of mine. I had no family, and I'm not going to deny that I've had shady dealings in the past, but I never participated in anything that had earned me prison time. Minutes would know that, I assume. The only guess I had was that it involved my former wife. My past, and all that, and come to think of it, I never did complete my revenge. By now, I could easily crush anyone I wanted, whether they were an earl or not. That I could do it any time sense of useless pride had caused me to give up on the notion entirely. Yeah, it might be a good idea to face up to my past already, I muttered as I left the restaurant. It'll help me turn the page. So I returned home to my office, and I opened up Minutes' envelope and read through the contents. No way. What I saw was shocking enough that I couldn't help but mumble that out loud. Seeing the name Earl Bulduff made me realize that I'd even forgotten the name of my target for revenge. That was fine, but what was written beyond that was hard to believe. This Earl Bulduff was now the leader of a sect of countryside nobility, one small enough that I was safe ignoring it in general. The member list included the name of the barony my ex-wife came from, and the entire roster consisted of barons, viscounts, and other low-end nobles. I'd have known about this sect if they were larger in scale, but considering they didn't even number 10 people, they must have escaped my attention. However, there was no overlooking this. The nobles that joined this faction have likely had their family inheritance compromised. I hurriedly read on, wondering what this meant. All the families involved had been run by virtuous, upstanding men in the previous generation. They never dealt with criminals, and they ruled their lands properly and with respect. That's why they'd been cornered so easily. It is believed Earl Bulduff forced an affiliated merchant to take on vast amounts of debt, allowing him to make this merchant do his bidding. Thoughts began to race through my mind. If this was true, Earl Bulduff could never be forgiven. But even before that, Mamiya. I couldn't help but shout her name. What if Mamiya had actually loved me all along? Once I had that thought, I could no longer sit still. I hurried for the door. Esther? Are you going out this late at night? Some business came up. Assemble my private guard at the airship dock. Get me an agent from the Intelligence Bureau, too. Exclamation mark at once, sir. The head butler of my household is a very capable man. One look at me, and he knew this was serious business. Saying nothing more, he quickly executed my orders for me. I had a solid set of evidence gathered for me before sunrise. The report Minutes gave me was accurate, there'd be no talking his way out of this. But one person was pathetically crying at me, refusing to accept reality. It's over for you, I said. No. Who do you think I am? I'm Bulduff. Part of the 8 wise rulers, famed across the countryside. What right do you have to arrest me? Even at this point, the foolish man refused to admit to his crimes. But Bulduff had good reason to try weaseling his way out of this. The nobility, after all, were given legal immunity in the empire, which made it impossible to arrest them without a warrant released by the imperial palace. The Knights of the Imperial Guardians, however, all had the right to write such a warrant, along with certain members of our Information Bureau. And so, Earl Bullduff, your warrant has already been verified. We have testimony from the victims. Please understand that there is no talking your way out of this. The agent I'd brought along with me had the right to arrest him, of course. Taking in someone as lofty as a noble earl was a major endeavor, but we had all our bases covered. I wanted to execute him myself, but that would have been going beyond my authority, so I held myself back. If I was the one killing him, I'd do it instantly and painlessly, and I had no interest in extending that mercy to this man. Q, quit being ridiculous. What right do you have to? Silence, Bullduff. Have you forgotten my face? I went right up to Bullduff, so he could see my eye patch well. What? Wait, are you Caligulio? Oh, you knew? Of course I did. Your exploits are famed across the Empire. I heard you tasted defeat at the hands of those dirty monsters, but I'm sure you'll vindicate yourself before long. He seriously had the wrong idea here. If Lady Testarossa had heard that just now, his fate would have been even worse than it already was. I could tell him that, but better not. Get him too angry at me, and I might be dragged into doing something I didn't want to. I'm amazed that you aren't ashamed of yourself. You were laughing the whole time while I was kicked out of my barren family, weren't you? Exclamation mark that's a misunderstanding. I hadn't explained anything to him yet, but that statement was tantamount to an admission of guilt. This is stupid, I said, my expression remaining unchanged. The Empire's Supreme Court will decide your fate. You'd better be ready for it. Their inquisitors aren't nearly as nice as me. Bullduff turned white as a sheet. Wait. Please, wait. Sir Caligulio. I'm sorry. I'll admit to it. Take him away. At my signal, the knights dragged Bullduff off. His failure to take this seriously was exasperating. The Imperial Supreme Court's purpose wasn't to go over all the details behind his crimes with a fine-tooth comb. It existed as a tool for taking down political opponents and stripping them of their rights. Admissions of guilt didn't matter. Their inquisitors weren't looking for testimony from suspects, their job was to take suspects' dignity away and make them obedient. Have fun writhing in pain, I said softly as I saw him off in the distance, and feeling the hate of all your victims, me included. After sending the knights home via airship, I took my personal autobike and headed for a small, remote town. I drove for a while, and soon I began to see familiar sights. There, beyond the hill, the mansion was the same as it always was. I'd thought it huge back in the day, but it actually seemed pretty tiny to me now, less than half the size of my manor in the capital. Still, this place was important to me. This sure brings me back. It's barely changed at all. I found myself unconsciously whispering these words. Maybe I was nervous. I was, after all, about to meet the woman who'd dumped me, or not. I knew now that had been my misunderstanding. All I needed was courage. It was a little past noon, and I recalled how my ex-wife would usually relax in the garden around this time. Trying to pump myself up as much as possible, I rang the doorbell. Yes? Who is it? The voice was familiar. It belonged to the assistant head butler of the manor, a man around 10 years older than me. It's me, Caligulio. I never intended to come back, but I've got important business here. Could you call Mamia, Miss Heath for me? I heard a slight gasp on the other side of the door. There was a beat, and then he replied very well and led me to a reception room where I'd wait for Mamia. Now all I had to do was open my heart to her before that man could return. By that man, I'm talking about Baron Nest Heath, the person who kicked me out and took over the Heath family. He was out, called over to the house of his friend Viscount Zook, so he should have been currently traveling to the next town over. I knew this because I'd arranged it. I had sent the knights out last evening to arrest Bullduff's cronies, and as I'd ordered them to keep their hands off Zook for the time being, on purpose, of course. We already knew that Zook was Nest's superior, so once he learned about Bullduff's arrest, he was bound to reach out to Nest. Now, just as I'd hoped for, Nest was on the move. A round trip between this town and the next one took a half day on the fastest horse. I had heard he'd left early in the morning, so he was unlikely to return until after dark. I needed to get everything settled before then. Sorry to make you wait, Sir Caligulio. I suppose I should say long time no see to you? My first taste of Mamia's voice in ages made my pulse accelerate. There's no need for formal titles between us. Are you doing well? Mamia was notably thinner. She had makeup on, but she wasn't trying to hide the bits of grey starting to appear in her hair. I deduced that she didn't have the money to beautify her appearance, which made a few facts apparent to me. This was a sudden visit, I knew, but a nobleman's wife would normally have paid more attention to her appearance than that. Of course, she's always my Mamia, no matter how she looks, but Minutes' report stated that Nest liked to spend extravagantly, and what I saw indicated that he didn't value her much. It sorely angered me. Oh, I hardly deserve the right to drop yours, Sir Caligulio. I am merely glad that you seem to be fine and healthy. Her attitude toward me was still hardened. She was nervous, unsure what I was doing here. So may I ask what brings you here today? Are you finally going to execute me? I saw that coming. What are you talking about? He. My husband left here this morning in a great rush. I'm sure he was up to no good. You must have some evidence against him, don't you? And I'm the woman who betrayed you. I can't think of any reason why you would have mercy on me. Her eyes looked beyond fatigued, bereft of all hope. We had been separated for 20 years, I had gone through a lot in the meantime, and this was true for Mamia, too. I didn't know if I had the right to ask what she'd been through, but still, I had to clear up this misunderstanding between us. I do have a reason. You were my wife. And my love hasn't changed at all since then. Oh, don't be silly. I'm not being silly, I avowed. What are you? Her eyes wavered a little. I am a foolish woman. Lower than a dog. There's no value in you remembering me. I committed a major crime, one that can never be forgiven. I did something to you I can never take back. She choked up, tears streaming down her face. She put up a bold exterior, but her words made her recall exactly what she'd done. That's right. Now I remember. Why had I hated Mamia so much, forgetting the one most important thing? My father-in-law, the Baron, was a fine man, a lord that I respected. I took in his one and only daughter. How could I have been so stupid? You did nothing wrong. I was a fool. I failed to notice that man's little trick, and I hurt the one person I swore that I'd protect. I spoke slowly, making sure I was understood. Mamia gave me a surprised look. Now, I was sure she would listen to my story. I didn't want to waste the opportunity. It still pains me to this day that I chose not to believe in you. I understand what you and the Heath family are dealing